Well, good morning, good morning. This is Robert Frank again. It's June 21st, and we're reading from the book Celestine. We'll get it right yet, won't we? Celestine Prophecies by James Redfield. And we'll start off from where I left off before. And so we will simply just continue reading. So here we go. Yes, it is. Her voice trailed off as she watched an older man appearing to be in his 60s walk toward us. The gentleman approaching is a micronutritionist, she said discreetly. He came down here about a year ago for the first time and immediately took a leave of absence from Washington State University. His name is Professor Haynes. He's done some great studies. As he arrived, I was introduced. He was a strongly built man with black hair, gray streaks at his temples. After some prodding from Marjorie, the professor began to summarize his research. He was most interested, he told me, in the functioning of the body organs as measured by highly sensitive blood tests, especially as this functioning related to the quality of food eaten. He told me what interested him most were the results of a particular study which showed that while nutritionally rich plants of the kind grown at Valencia increased the body's efficiency dramatically, the increase was beyond what could be reasonably expected from the nutrients themselves as we understand how they work in human physiology. Something inherent in the structure of these plants creates an effect not yet accounted for. I looked at Marjorie, then asked, then the focusing of attention on these plants give them something that boosts human strength in return when they're eaten. Is this energy mentioned in the manuscript? Marjorie looked at the professor. He gave me only a half smile. I don't know yet, he said. I asked him about his future research, and he explained that he wanted to duplicate the garden at Washington State and set up some long-term studies to see if people eating these plants had more energy or were healthier over a longer period of time. As he spoke, I couldn't help glancing periodically at Marjorie. Suddenly, she looked incredibly beautiful. Her body appeared long and slender, even under her baggy jeans and t-shirt. Her eyes and hair were dark brown, and her hair fell in tapered curls around her face. I felt a powerful physical attraction. At the exact moment I became aware of this attraction, she turned her head, stared directly into my eyes, and backed away from me a step. I've got to meet someone, she said. Maybe I'll see you later. She told Haynes goodbye, smiled coyly at me, and walked past the metal building and down the path. After a few more minutes of discussion with the professor, I wished him well and strolled back to where Sarah was standing. She was still talking intensely with one of the other researchers, but she followed me with her eyes as I walked. As I approached the man she was with, smiled, rearranged the notes on his clipboard, and walked into the building. Find out anything? Sarah asked. Yes, I said distractingly. It sounds like these folks are doing some interesting things. I was looking at the ground when she said, "Where did Marjorie go?" As I glanced up, I could see she had an amused look on her face. She said she had to meet someone. "Did you turn her off?" she asked, smiling now. I laughed. "I guess I did, but it didn't say a thing." "You didn't have to," she said. "Marjorie could detect a change in your field. It was pretty obvious. I could see it all the way over here." "A change in my what?" "In the energy field around your body. Most of us have learned to see them, at least in certain light. When a person has sexual thoughts, the person's energy field sort of swirls about and actually propels out toward the person who's the object of the attraction." This struck me as totally fantastic. But before I could comment, we were distracted by several people coming out of the metal building. "Time now for the energy projections," Sarah said. "You'll want to see this." We followed four young men, apparently students, to a plot of corn. As we walked closer, I realized that the plot was made up of two separate subplots, each about 10 feet square. The corn in one was about 2 feet high. In the other, the plants were less than 15 inches. The four men walked to the plot containing the taller corn and then sat down, each on one corner of the plot facing inward. On cue, they all seemed to focus their eyes on the plants. The late afternoon sun shone from behind me, bathing the plot in soft amber light, yet the woods beyond remained dark in the distance. The plot of corn and the students were silhouetted against the almost black background. Sarah was standing beside me. "This is perfect," she said. "Look, can you see that?" "What?" "They're projecting their energy onto the plants." I stared intently at the scene but could detect nothing. "I can't see anything," I said. "Squat down lower then," Sarah said, "and focus on the space between the people and the plants." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of light, but I concluded it was just an after image or my eyes playing tricks on me. I tried several more times to see something, then gave up. "I can't do it," I said, standing. Sarah patted me on the shoulder. "Don't worry about it. The first time is the most difficult. It usually takes some experimenting with the way you focus your eyes." "Rascal, what are you doing?" One of the meditators looked over at us and brought his index finger up to his lips. So we walked back toward the building. "Are you going to be here at Vicentia long?" Sarah asked. "Probably not," I said. "The person I'm with is looking for the last part of the manuscript." She looked surprised. "I thought all of it had been located." "Though I guess I wouldn't know. I've been so engrossed in the part that pertains to my work that I haven't read much of the rest." I instinctively reached for my pants pocket, suddenly uncertain where Sarah's translation was. It was rolled up in my back pocket. "You know," Sarah said, "we found two periods of the day most conducive to seeing energy fields. One is in the sunset, the other is the sunrise. If you want, I'll meet you at dawn tomorrow and we'll try again." She reached out for the folder. That way, she continued, "I can make you a copy of this translation and you can take it with you." I pondered this suggestion for a few seconds, then decided it couldn't hurt. Why not, I said. I'll have to check with my friend, though, and make sure we have enough time. I smiled at her. What makes you think I can learn to see this stuff? Call it a hunch. We agreed to meet on the hill at 6 a.m., and I started the 1-mile trek to the lodge again. The sun had completely disappeared, but its light still bathed the gray clouds along the horizon in hues of orange. The air was chilly, but no wind blew. At the lodge, a line was forming in front of the serving bar in the huge dining room. Feeling hungry, I walked toward the head of the line to see what food was being served. Will and Professor Haynes were standing near the front, talking casually. Well, Will said, how did the afternoon go? Great, I said. This is Will Haynes, Will added. Yes, I said, we met earlier. The professor nodded. I mentioned my early morning rendezvous the next day. Will saw no problem, as he wanted to find a couple of people he hadn't talked to yet and didn't anticipate leaving before 9 a.m. The line moved forward, and the people behind us invited me to join my friends. I stepped in beside the professor. So what do you make of what you're doing here? Haynes asked. I don't know, I said. I'm trying to let it soak in a little. The whole idea of energy field is new to me. The reality of it is new to everyone, he said, but the interesting thing is that this energy is what scientists has always been looking for. Some common stuff underlying all matter. Since Einstein's particularly physics has sought a unified field theory. I don't know if this is it or not, but at the very least, this manuscript has stimulated some interesting research. What would it take for science to accept this idea, I asked. A way to measure it, he said. The existence of this energy is not that foreign, actually. Karate masters have talked about an underlying chi energy responsible for their seemingly impossible stunts of breaking bricks with their hands and of being able to sit in one place unmoved with 4 men trying to push them over. And we've all seen athletes make spectacular moves, twisting, turning, hanging in the air in ways that defy gravity. It's all the result of this hidden energy that we have access to. Of course, it won't really be accepted until more people can actually see it for themselves. Have you observed it? I asked. I've observed something, he said. It really depends on what I've eaten. How so? Well, the people around here who really see these energy fields eat mostly vegetables, and they usually eat only these highly potent plants they've grown themselves. He pointed ahead to the food bar. This is some of it. Oh, thank goodness. They serve some fish and fowl for old guys like me who are addicted to meat. But if I force myself to eat differently, yes, I can see something. I asked him why he didn't change his diet for longer periods of time. I don't know, he said. Old habits die hard. The line moved forward and I ordered my vegetables. The 3 of us joined a larger table of guests and talked casually for an hour. Then Will and I walked out to the Jeep to remove our gear. Have you seen these energy fields? I asked. He smiled and nodded. My room is on the 1st floor, he said. Yours is on the 3rd. room 306. You can pick up your key up at the desk. The room had no phone, but a lodge attendant I saw in the hallway assured me someone would knock on my door at 5 a.m. sharp. I lay down and thought for a few minutes. The afternoon had been long and full, and I understood Will's silence. He wanted me to experience the third insight in my own way. The next thing I knew, someone was banging on the door. I looked at my watch, 5 a.m. When the attendant knocked again, I said, "Thank you," in a voice loud enough for him to hear, and then rose and looked out the small frame window. The only sign of morning was a pale glow of light towards the east. I walked down the hall and showered, then dressed quickly and went downstairs. The dining room was open, and a surprising number of people were moving about. I ate only fruit and hurried outside. Strands of fog drifted across the ground and clung to the distant meadows. Songbirds called one another from trees. As I walked away from the lodge, the very top of the sun reached the horizon towards the east. Color was spectacular. The sky was a deep blue above the bright peach horizon. I arrived at the knoll 15 minutes early, so I sat down and leaned against the trunk of a tree, a large tree. Fascinated by the web of garnered branches growing out above my head. In a few minutes, I heard someone walking toward me along the path, and I looked that way, expecting to see Sarah. Instead, I saw someone I didn't know, a man in his mid-40s. He left the path and walked my way without noticing me. When he was within 10 feet, he saw me with a start, which made me flinch also. "Oh, hello," he said in a rich Brooklyn accent. He was dressed in jeans and hiking boots and looked exceptionally fit and athletic. His hair was curly and receding. I nodded. "Sorry about walking up on you so suddenly," he said. "No problem." He told me his name was Phil Stone, and I told him who I was and that I was waiting for a friend. "You must be doing some research here," I added. "Not really," he replied. "I work for the University of Southern California. We're doing studies in another province on the rainforest depletion. But whenever I get the chance, I drive over here and take a break. I like the hanging out where the forests are so different." He looked around. "Do you realize that some of these trees here are close to 500 years old? This is truly a virgin forest, a rare thing. Everything is in perfect balance. The larger trees filtering the sunlight, allowing a multitude of tropical plant life to thrive underneath. Plant life in a rainforest is old too, but it grows differently. It's basically jungle. This is more like what an old forest looks like in a temperate zone, such as in the United States." "I've never seen anything like this there," I said. "I know," he said. "Only a few remain. Most of the ones I know of were sold by the government to lumber interests, as though all they could see in a forest like this is board feet of lumber. Damn shame that anyone would mess with a place like this. Look at the energy." "You can see the energy here?" I asked. He looked at me closely, as though deciding whether to elaborate. "Yes, I can," he said finally. "Well, I haven't been able to," I said. "I tried yesterday when they were meditating with plants at the garden." "Oh, I couldn't see fields that large at first either," he said. "I had to start by looking at my fingers." "How do you mean?" "Let's move over there," he said, pointing to an area where the trees parted slightly and blue sky showed through overhead. I'll show you. When we arrived, he said, lean back and touch the tips of your index fingers together. Keep the blue sky in the background. Now separate the tips about an inch and look at the area directly between them. What do you see? Dust on the lens of my eye. Ignore that, he said. Take your eyes out of focus a little and move the tips closer, then further apart. As he talked, I moved my fingers around, unsure what he meant by taking my eyes out of focus. I finally placed my gaze vaguely on the area between my fingers. Both fingertips were slightly blurry, and as this happened, I saw something like strands of smoke stretching between the tips. Good grief, I said, and explained what I saw. That's it, he said. Now, just play with that a while. I touched all four fingers together, then my palms and forearms. In each case, I continued to see streaks of energy between the body parts. I dropped my arms and looked at Phil. Oh, you want to see mine? He asked. He stood up and stepped back a few feet, positioning his head and torso so the sky would be directly behind him. I tried for a few minutes, but a noise behind us broke my concentration. I turned and I saw Sarah. Phil stepped forward and grinned broadly. Is this the person you've been waiting for? As Sarah approached, she too was smiling. Hey, I know you, she said, pointing at Phil. They embraced warmly. Then Sarah looked at me and said, sorry, I'm late. My mental alarm didn't go off for some reason, but now I guess I know why. They gave you two a chance to talk. What have you been doing? He just learned how to see the feels between his fingers, Phil said. Sarah looked at me. Last year, Phil and I were up here at this very spot, learning to do the same thing. She glanced at Phil. Let's put our backs together. Maybe he can see the energy between us. They stood back to back in front of me. I suggested they move closer, and they stepped toward me until the space between us was about 4 feet. They were silhouetted against the sky, which was still a dark blue in that direction. To my surprise, the space between them looked lighter. It was yellow, or a yellowish pink. He sees it, Phil said, reading my expression. Sarah turned and grabbed Phil by the arm, and they slowly stepped away from me so that their bodies were perhaps 10 feet away. Surrounding their upper torsos was a whitish pink field of energy. Okay, Sarah said seriously. She had walked over and crouched down beside me. Now, look at the scene here, the beauty. I was immediately awed by the shapes and forms around me. I seemed to be able to focus on each of the massive oaks in a total way, not merely on one part, but on the whole form at once. I was immediately struck by the unique shape and configuration of limbs each displayed. I looked from one to the other, turning all around. Doing this somehow increased the feeling of presence each oak excluded to me, as though I was seeing them for the first time, or at least fully appreciating them for the first time. Suddenly, the tropical foliage underneath the huge trees attracted my attention. I again looked at the unique form each plant exhibited. I also noticed the way each type of plant grew together with others of its own kind in what struck me as a little communities. For instance, The tall banana tree type plants were often encircled by small philodendrons, who themselves were poised among even smaller fern-like plants. When I looked at these mini environments, I was again struck by their uniqueness of outline and presence. Less than 10 feet away, a particular foliage plant caught my eye. I had often owned just this type as a house plant, a particular variegated form of philodendron. Dark green, its foliage branched out to about 4 feet in diameter. The shape of this plant seemed perfectly healthy and vibrant. Yay! Focus on that one, but loosely, Sarah said. As I did so, I played with the focus of my eyes. At one point, I tried to focus on the space 6 inches to one side of each physical part of the plant. Gradually, I began to pick up glimpses of light. Then, with a single adjustment of my focus, I could see a bubble of white light encircling the plant. I'm seeing something now, I said. Look around some, Sarah said. I stepped back in shock. Around each plant within my vision was a field of whitish light, visible yet totally transparent, so that none of the plant's color or form was obscured. I realized that I was seeing was an extension of each plant's unique beauty. It was as though first I had seen the plants, then I had seen their uniqueness and presence, and then something had amplified in the pure beauty of their physical expression, at which time I had seen the energy fields. See if you can see this, Sarah said. She sat down in front of me and faced the philodendron. A plume of the whitish light encircling her body erupted outward and engulfed the philodendron. The diameter of the plant's energy field in turn broadened by several feet. Damn, I explained, which provoked laughter between the two friends. Soon I was laughing myself, conscious of the peculiarity of what was happening, but feeling absolutely no uneasiness at seeing, quite readily, phenomena I had totally doubted minutes earlier. I realized that the perception of the fields, rather than invoking a surrealistic sensation, actually made the things about me seem more solid and real than before. Yet at the same time, everything around me seemed different. The only reference I had for the experience was perhaps a movie which enhanced the color of a forest in order to make it seem mystical and enchanted. The plants, the leaves, the sky now all stood out with a presence and a slimmer that suggested life there, and perhaps consciousness beyond our ordinary assumption. After seeing this, there would be no way to take a forest for granted again. I looked at Phil. Sit down and put your energy on the philodendron. And I said, I'd like to compare. Phil appeared perplexed. I can't do it, he said. I don't know why. I looked at Sarah. Some people can and some people can't, she said. We haven't figured it out. Marjorie has to screen her graduate students to see who can do it. A couple of psychologists are trying to correlate this ability with personality characteristics, but so far no one knows. Let me try it, I said. Okay, go ahead, Sarah replied. I sat down again and faced the plant. Sarah and Phil stood at the right angles to me. Okay, how do I begin? Just focus your attention on the plant as though to inflate it with your own energy, Sarah said. I looked at the plant and imagined energy swelling up inside it. Then after a few minutes, I looked over at the two. Sorry, Sarah said wearily. You're obviously not one of the chosen few. I shook a mock frown at Phil. Angry voices from the path below interrupted our conversation. Through the trees, we could see a group of men passing and talking and harshly among themselves. Who are those people? Phil asked, looking at Sarah. I don't know, she said. More folks upset with what we're doing, I guess. I looked back at the forest around us. Everything appeared ordinary again. Hey, I can't see the energy fields anymore. Some things bring you right down, don't they? Sarah remarked. Phil smiled and patted my shoulder. You can do it again any time now. It's just like riding a bicycle. All you have to do is see the beauty and then extend from there. I suddenly remembered to check the time. The sun was much higher in the sky, and a light mid-morning breeze swayed the trees. My watch showed 7:50 a.m. I guess I had better head back, I said. Sarah and Phil joined me. As we walked, I looked back at the wooded hillside. That's one beautiful place, I said. Too bad there aren't more places like this in the States. Once you see the energy fields in other areas, Phil said, you'll realize just how dynamic this forest is. Look at these oaks. They are very rare in Peru, but they grow here at Vicentia, a cut forest, especially one that has been stripped of hardwoods in order to grow pines for profit, has a very low energy field, and a city, except for the people, has a different kind of energy altogether. I tried to focus on the plants along the path, but the act of walking disrupted my concentration. You're sure I'll see these fields again, I said. Absolutely, Sarah replied. I've never heard of anyone failing to duplicate the experience once they've seen them initially. We had a research ophthalmologist come through here once, and he got all excited after he learned to see the fields. Turned out he had been working with certain sight abnormalities, including forms of color blindness, and concluded that some people have what he called lazy receptors in their eyes. He had taught people how to see colors they'd never experienced before. According to him, seeing energy fields was just a matter of doing the same thing, of waking up other dormant receptors, something that everyone theoretically can do. I wish I lived near a place like this, I said. Don't we all, Phil replied, then looked around me at Sarah. Is Dr. Haynes still here? Yes, Sarah said. He can't leave. Phil looked at me. Now there's a guy who's doing some interesting research on what this energy can do for you. Yeah, I said. I talked with him yesterday. The last time I was here, Phil continued, he was telling me about a study he would like to conduct in which he would look at the physical effects of merely being near certain high energy environments, such as the forest back there. He would use the same measurements of ordinary efficiency and output to see the effect. Well, I already know the effect, Sarah said. Whenever I drive into this estate, I begin to feel better. Everything is amplified. I seem stronger. I can think more clearly and quickly. And the insights I have into all this and how it relates to my work is in physics is amazing. What are you working on? I asked. Do you remember me telling you about the perplexing experiments in particle physics, during which these little bits of atoms appeared whenever the scientists expected them to be there? Yeah. Well, I've tried to expand this idea a bit with some experiments of my own. Not to solve the problems those guys were working on in subatomic particles, but to explore the questions I told you about before. To what extent does the physical universe as a whole, since it is made up of the same basic energy, respond to our expectations? To what extent do our expectations create all things that happen to us? The coincidence, you mean? Yes. Think of the events of your life. The old Newtonian idea is that everything happens by chance, that one can make good decisions and be prepared, but that every event has its own line of causation independent of our own attitude. After the recent discoveries of modern physics, we may legitimately ask if the universe is more dynamic than that. Perhaps the universe runs mechanically as a basic operation, but then also subtly responds to the mental energy we project out into it. I mean, why not? If we can make plants grow faster, maybe we can make certain events come faster or slower, depending on how we think. Does the manuscript talk about any of this? Sarah smiled at me. Of course, that's where we're getting these ideas. She began to dig around in her pack as we walked, finally pulling out a folder. Here's your copy, she said. I glanced at it briefly. And placed it in my pocket. We were crossing the bridge, and I hesitated a moment, observing the colors and the forms of the plants around me. I altered my focus and immediately saw the energy fields around everything in my view. Both Sarah and Phil had wide fields which seemed to be tinted yellow-green, though Sarah's field occasionally flashed with a pinkish color. Suddenly, they both stopped and looked intently up the trail. Ahead about 50 feet, a man walked quickly toward us. A sensation of anxiety filled my stomach, but I was determined to maintain my view of the energy. As he approached, I recognized him. He was the taller of the scientists from the University of Peru, who had asked for directions the day before. Around him, I could detect a layer of red. When he walked up to us, he turned to Sarah and coincidentally said, "You're a scientist, aren't you?" "That's right," Sarah replied. "Then how can you tolerate this kind of science? I've seen these gardens and I can't believe the sloppiness. You people haven't controlled for anything. There could be many explanations for certain plants growing larger. Controlling for everything is impossible, sir. We're looking for general tendencies." I could detect an edge growing in Sarah's voice, but postulating some newly visible energy that underlines the chemistry of living things, that's absurd. You have no proof. Proof is what we're looking for. But how can you postulate the existence of anything before you get some proof? The voices of both individuals sounded angry now, but I was only vaguely listening. What consumed my attention was the dynamics of their energy fields. When the discussion began, Phil and I had backed up a few feet, and Sarah and the taller man had squared off, facing each other with a distance of about 4 feet between them. Immediately, both their energy fields had seemed to grow more dense and excited, somehow as though from an intervibration. As the conversation progressed, their fields began to intermingle. When one of them made a point, his field would create a movement which seemed to suck at the other's field with what appeared to be a kind of vacuum maneuver. But then, as the other person made his rebuttal, the energy would move back in his direction. In terms of the dynamics of the energy fields, winning the point seemed to mean capturing part of the opponent's field and pulling it into oneself. Besides, Sarah was saying to the man, we have observed the phenomena we're trying to understand. The man gave Sarah a disdainful look. Then you are insane as well as incompetent, he said, and walked away. You're a dinosaur, Sarah shouted, which made Phil and me laugh. Sarah, however, was still tense. These people can make me angry, Sarah said, as we resumed our walk along the path. Forget it, Phil said. These kinds of people come around here sometimes. But why so many, Sarah asked, and why right now? As we walked up to the lodge, I could see Will at the Jeep. The doors of the vehicle were open and gear was spread out on top of the hood. He saw me immediately and motioned for me to come over. Well, looks like I'm about to take off, I said. My comment broke a 10-minute silence, which had begun when I had tried to explain what I had seen happen to Sarah's energy during the argument. Evidently, I had not put it very well because my comments had provoked only blank stares and had cast us all into a long period of self-absorption. It's been nice meeting you, Sarah said, offering her hand. Bill was looking toward the Jeep. Is that Will James? He asked. Is he the guy you're traveling with? Yes, I said, why? I just wondered. I've seen him around. He knows the owner of this place and was one of the early group that first engaged the research in the energy fields here. Come on up and meet him, I said. No, I have to go, he said. I'll see you around here later on. I know you won't be able to stay away. No doubt, I said. Sarah interjected that she too needed to go and that I could contact her through the lodge. I delayed them for a few more minutes, expressing my thanks for the lessons. Sarah's expression grew serious. Seeing the energy, grasping this new way of perceiving the physical world, rose through a kind of cognition. We don't understand it, but when a person hangs out with others who see this energy, usually they begin to see it too. So go show it to someone else. I nodded and then hurried up to the Jeep. Will greeted me with a smile. Are you about ready? I asked. Almost, he said. How did the morning go? Interesting, I said. I've got a lot to talk to you about. You'd better save it for now, he said. We need to get out of here. Things are looking unfriendly. I walked closer to them. What's going on? I asked. Nothing too serious, he said. I'll explain later. Get your stuff. I walked in the lodge and picked up the few items I had left in my room. Will had told me earlier there would be no charge, courtesy of the owner, so I walked down to the desk and handed the clerk my keys and walked back outside to the Jeep. Will was under the hood, checking something, and he slammed it closed as I walked up. Okay, he said, let's go. We drove out of the parking lot, then down the drive toward the main road. Several cars were leaving at the same time. So what's happening? I asked Will. A group of local officials, he replied, along with some scientific types, have complained about the people associated with this conference center. They're not alleging that anything illegal is going on, just that some of the folks hanging around here may be what they call undesirable, not legitimate scientists. These officials could cause a lot of trouble, and that it could effectively put the lodge out of business. I looked at him blankly, and he continued. You see, this lodge normally has several groups booked at any one time. Only a small number have anything to do with research associated with the manuscript. The other are groups focused on their own disciplines who come down here for the beauty. If the officials get too ugly and create a negative climate, these groups will stop meeting here. But I thought you said the local officials wouldn't tamper with the tourist money coming into Valencia. I didn't think they would. Someone has been nervous about the manuscript. Did anyone at the gardens understand what was occurring? No, not really. I said they were just wondering why all of a sudden more angry people were around. Will remained silent. We drove out to the gate and turned southeast. A mile later, we took another road which headed due east toward the mountain range in the distance. We'll be going right by the gardens, Will said after a while. Ahead, I saw the plots and the first metal building. As we came alongside, the door opened, and I met eyes with a person coming out. It was Marjorie. She smiled and turned toward me as we passed, our gaze lingering for a long moment. Who was that? Will asked. A woman I met yesterday, I answered. He nodded, then changed the subject. Did you get a look at the third insight? I was given a copy. Will didn't reply, appearing to be lost in thought, so I pulled out the translation and found where I had stopped reading. From there, the third insight elaborated on the nature of beauty, describing this perception as the one thought which humans would eventually learn to observe energy fields. Once this occurred, it said, then our understanding of the physical universe would quickly transform. For instance, we would begin to eat more foods which were still alive with this energy. We would become conscious that certain localities radiate more energy than others, the highest radiation coming from old natural environments, especially forests. I was about to read the final pages when Will suddenly spoke. Tell me what your experience back at the gardens, he said. As best I could, I related in detail the events of the 2 days, including the people I had met. When I told him of the encounter with Marjorie, he looked at me and smiled. How much did you talk to these people about other insights and how these insights relate to what they're doing in the gardens? He asked. I didn't mention them at all, I replied. I didn't trust them at first, and later I just figured they knew more than me. I think you could have given them some important information had you been perfectly honest with them. What kind of information? He looked at me warmly. Only you know that. And that's it. We are done with that part of it. And so, without further ado, I'll see you next time when I come back, and hope everybody enjoys the readings, and I'll see you in the near future, like maybe a couple days from now. Thank you, and goodbye.